Thanks very much, Dave. Thanks very much, Dave. Delegates, thanks for the chance to be here today. I've got a few things to share, and then I know we'll get into hopefully a productive bear pit session as well. I'm sure you'll have some specific questions and some general comments that would help us as we go through the spring session, getting closer to the budget and planning for the future, as well as on this important issue of grain transportation, commodity transportation. I will deal with that this morning, and I'm going to seek your help in continuing to make sure we see progress made and the right legislation passed in Ottawa later this month, introduced in Ottawa later this month. So good morning. We have a great delegation from our caucus here, from Cabinet and caucus, and I want to thank all of them. I get to make all of the pretty good announcements, or at least most of them, but the heavy lifting is done by our caucus and our Cabinet, and we have a great team of women and men, and I would just, notwithstanding politics, I just ask you to help me thank them for what they do every day here in the province of Saskatchewan. Because of the ascendancy in our agriculture sector over the last number of years, and because of some recent challenges, one of those members of the caucus that I've had to meet a lot with recently and talk a lot with recently is Lyle Stewart, the Agriculture Minister. And there's some benefit, some dividend that comes with that. When you have a meeting with Lyle, it's typically fairly short, and you know exactly where he stands and where everyone stands when the meeting's done. And I was thinking, because of this time together with Lyle, about really the first occasions we met. Lyle and I were elected to the Legislative Assembly in the same year, in 1999. And I remember walking up the steps of the legislative building with Lyle in those very early days. And I remember saying to him, "Lyle, I can't believe that I'm here. How about you?" And he said, "I can't believe you're here either." Lyle said that because he's kind of a jerk, but he's our jerk, and we're going to need that going forward on the transportation issue. Ladies and gentlemen, I talk a lot about, and I hear others talking about, the new Saskatchewan, and so we should. The new Saskatchewan that has seen some economic strength here very recently, and has been increasingly in a position of national leadership, not because of the government, but because of the resources we have and because of all of you. We should remember, though, that what is best about the new Saskatchewan is that it is built on a foundation of what is best about the Saskatchewan we have always known. I won't call it the old Saskatchewan, but what's happening today is really based on the foundation of what has been best about this province. And that came home to me recently in a story from one of our senior team members, a true and very current story. His daughter he lives here in Regina, his daughter attends university in Saskatchewan, and she was driving back to campus, I would imagine on a Sunday, a snowy Sunday, and she got stuck near Bethune. And so she placed a pretty panicked call to her parents and said that she was stuck and it was getting cold and she was getting a little bit concerned. And so her dad got on the phone and he tried the tow truck companies, and there was none available. And so he really didn't know what to do. He called the Bethune Bar and Grill near where she was. This is a true story. And a lady answered the phone, and he asked if there was anybody there that could help his daughter, because she was stuck in the snow. And she looked around the room and she said, "Don't worry, Chris from the RM office is here, and he'll help her." And so the dad asked, "Oh, really? Who is Chris from the RM office that you're going to send out to help our daughter?" And she said on the other end of the line, "Chris is a good guy. You don't have to worry about him. You will be in good hands with Chris." Chris turned out to be Chris Lloyd. He's a young equipment operator for the arm of Dufferin. And a few minutes later, he and his buddy Taylor Sigmuth showed up and pulled this young lady out of the snowdrift, got her on her way. And when she phoned to tell her mom and dad that everything was fine, that she was on her way, and that these two had helped make that happen, they turned to each other and said the same thing, one word: Saskatchewan. We must never lose that in this province. No matter what happens to our economy, no matter No matter the success stories that we can point to, we must never lose the heart and the character, the principles, the values, and I don't think we will, of the province of Saskatchewan. I'm confident that we won't, by the way, because these values manifest themselves everywhere in Saskatchewan, rural and urban, north and south, but they are on full display every day in rural Saskatchewan. And we are reminded of that. We should be. We are reminded of the fact that really that's the history of this province. That's its genesis. It was all rural at the beginning. And so what is best about the new Saskatchewan is in large measure due to the reality that you live every day and lead every day in your municipalities in rural Saskatchewan. And for that, I just want to say on behalf of a grateful province, thank you very much. Thank you for your service. And through you to people like Chris, the RM guy, we say thank you as well this morning. We know that much of what is great about the new Saskatchewan is also founded on what we find in rural Saskatchewan, and I'm talking about agriculture and natural resources. We try to understand that every day. We remind ourselves that our government does every day, and it's easy to do. Half of our caucus have a farming background. Half of our cabinet grew up on farms, and so we never lose sight of the importance of rural Saskatchewan to the province. And I hope you would agree that based on our record, we more than just recognize the importance, we have worked hard to act on the importance of rural Saskatchewan. We'd hope you see that through things like what we've done with MREP, where we've increased funding, boosted spending on rural roads, bridges, and culverts by 400%. We hope you see that through record highways budgets with more needed that have involved twinning projects and some passing lane projects that are important. The twinning between Saskatoon and PA now complete, and we'll move on to 6 and 39, and we'll hear in the budget about potentially some more infrastructure investment on our roads. We hope you'd see our commitment to rural Saskatchewan manifest in the fact that rural schools are now opening. Brand new schools in rural Saskatchewan are opening as they are in the cities to deal with population growth, through 13 new long-term care facilities across the province, through projects like the Shellbrook Integrated Health Center that we opened last fall, and another new facility like it that will open in Rosetown within weeks. We hope you see our commitment to rural Saskatchewan through the new supports we campaigned on in 11 and then implemented for personal care home support, a supplement that now tops a senior's income up to $1,875 so they can afford personal care home. 40% of the people taking advantage of that program, by the way, are from rural Saskatchewan, and one of the first places we heard a call for increased support for that prior to the last election was at a convention just like this. And then the convention just like this that followed, and then the one that came after that. You've been very, very consistent. We hope that our commitment to rural Saskatchewan has also been demonstrated by what we have tried to do and what we are going to continue to try to do in terms of rural health care needs. When there is a doctor shortage or a nursing shortage, it is always by definition more acute in rural parts of Canada than it is in urban parts of Canada. And so we worked hard to revamp the accreditation for new doctors. We have a brand new process. We've expanded the number of countries from which we could receive foreign trained doctors. We've expanded the training seats for doctors and the residency positions, and taken those, by the way, out of the major centers into the rural areas as well. And so today there are 1,000 more nurses than there were when we started practicing in Saskatchewan, and about 200 plus more doctors practicing, with more needed. 90% of the new doctors practicing, by the way, are in places like Kipling and Carlisle and Kamsack. We moved immediately to try to provide better emergency care for rural Saskatchewan, and that's why we make a big annual investment in STARS. Excuse me. Thanks, Dave. Sorry, that's okay. The good news for the House later today is I'm losing my voice. I don't mean the legislature, I mean my House. The good news for Tammy. We hope that commitment to rural Saskatchewan is also evidenced by what we've done in post-secondary training, where we've increased support and investment in our regional college system, where we're opening up brand new college campuses like Parkland at Yorkton in partnership with industry that want to put those people to work. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope that what is not forgotten in this room is the fact that as soon as we were able, we moved on a commitment to deal with the long-standing issue of high education property taxes in Saskatchewan. This was an issue not just in rural Saskatchewan, it was an issue in urban areas as well, but the problem was felt, the sting was greater in rural Saskatchewan. The dependence on farmland to fund education was disproportionately greater than any other classification, and so we undertook significant reform. We cut those taxes significantly. Many of your ratepayers received up to an 80% reduction in the education property tax. We've also increased revenue sharing, as you know, and that's been for all municipalities, but there are good examples of benefits to RMs, including Corman Park, getting a 141% increase since we made those changes in revenue sharing. RM of Eyebrow, 103% increase. RM of South Quappel, 143% increase. And then in agriculture, if you're going to walk your talk about rural Saskatchewan, I think the important metric, maybe the most important one of all for a government, is what are you doing in terms of agriculture policy in the province that is home to 45% of the arable acres in the Dominion of Canada? Well, as you know, we've worked hard to improve crop insurance every single year. We've worked hard to get that mix of premiums and coverage right, to adapt to what we're hearing from SARM. We've worked hard on certain pest control issues that haven't been always understood in other parts of the province, but you know the importance of them, and we do too. We worked hard to support the livestock industry early on when they were in some difficulty, to deal with drought areas, to do the same in the case of flooding, and this is, by the way, a process, not an event, to improve disaster assistance programming and mitigation, but we put the dollars in place and we've reached out in partnership to do it. There have been record agricultural budgets as well to point to. We moved the agri-stability offices from Winnipeg to the province so there would be a greater sensitivity to Saskatchewan needs. I hope you will see, ladies and gentlemen, from our past efforts that ours is more than just talk about rural Saskatchewan. Ours has been about action, and our record has also been about vision for rural Saskatchewan. And I hope you'll see as well in next week's budget, on Wednesday, that commitment remains. I can tell you it'll be a tighter budget. It happened in our first term in 2009, this counterintuitive occurrence of a strong economy and weaker revenues. It happened because of potash in 2009. It'll happen in part because of potash revenues this year, where our economy will remain strong, but government revenues will be flat. And so we're going to have to make sure we make the right decisions to keep the budget balanced. It will be a 7th consecutive balanced budget that Minister Kravets will introduce in the legislature next Wednesday. And we have looked at the tax options. You heard what I had to say to your counterparts at SUMA. I'm not going to announce what is in or not in the budget today, but I will just tell you that if this government ever looks at any kind of revenue increases on the tax side, it will have been born of a last resort. And there'll be more next Wednesday, of course, in the budget on infrastructure investments we want to continue to make, both in rural and urban Saskatchewan. So, if the best indicator of future behavior is past behavior, I hope you will understand that as soon as we have the fiscal capacity, we're actually going to be able to move even more aggressively in some of these areas, especially around infrastructure, that your president has constantly and consistently raised with us, that we'll be able to do that in future years. And I make one other commitment to you, that when it comes to transportation policy, when it comes to advocating for the sectors of the economy that reside principally in rural Saskatchewan outside of our borders, international engagement, we will continue to work very, very hard on your behalf to market this province, to open potentially new markets to the things that are being produced in rural Saskatchewan. Tomorrow we'll host the U.S. partnership meeting, the first one we've had in a long time here in Regina. For those of you who may not be aware, the U.S. partnership is a free trade zone that Alberta has formed with Saskatchewan and British Columbia. 3 provinces in Western Canada decided to remove some of the barriers to trade and investment that exist between our provinces, if you can believe it or or not. Including, by the way, one of the barriers we removed was around the inspection piece for those who had cattle. I don't think it was ever enforced, but technically, if you're in southwest Saskatchewan and you wanted to move some cattle over to the Alberta side of the border, you had to go through a process with the Alberta government and with the Saskatchewan government. And so we put that under the category of dumb, and we fixed it. There's a number of other initiatives in the New West Partnership, like you're registered to do business in one province of the three, and so you're automatically registered to do business in all of the provinces without going through all of the registration process and bureaucracy again. Anyway, we meet here in Regina at Government House. Premier Clark and Premier Redford will be here, and we're going to talk about what's next for the New West Partnership. We've done joint trade missions before, ladies and gentlemen, on this issue of international engagement with the New West Partnership. We've done one. That was when Premier Campbell was in British Columbia and Premier Stelmach was the Premier of Alberta. When we went to Asia, and I remember before we left, I was a little trepidatious. I thought we were going with two other provinces, each of them 4 times our size. Each of them likely better known in the market we're headed. Alberta for its oil sands, British Columbia because it's been developing those ties with Asia and it has Vancouver and obviously a large population as well. And I was kind of worried, how would we stand out in that milieu? How would we, as Saskatchewan, fare with those other two? The answer is in this room. It was a good answer. The answer was in the area of the province that is represented in this particular room. Because we were going to Asia after all. The fastest growing economies of the world, where their middle classes are growing at near an exponential rate, if you consider the last number of years, and where a growing middle class wants energy security and food security. Many parts of Asia want protein alternatives. Many of them want just the very basic staples. They all want energy. And so as I was able to speak at this trade mission to the various groups we were at, I was suddenly representing that part of the world, one province, one subnational jurisdiction on the planet Earth that was responsible for 49% of the world's lentil exports. And they paid attention to that. And 37% of the world's pea exports. And they were interested in that. 37% of the world's durum exports, and 26% of the world's mustard exports, and 24% of the world's flaxseed exports. These are global numbers now, just from our province, not from Western Canada, just us, just you. 20% of the world's canola oil exports. A third of Canada's ag biotech sector right here in the province of Saskatchewan. In Japan, I could point to the fact that we pioneered so many varieties, developed so many varieties in this province that we're feeding a world. And in fact, because we had designed a special malting barley variety for Japan, we had 17% of their market. And I told Campbell and Stelmach, you can talk about oil and trees, I'm talking about beer. 45% of the world's potash in this completely contrived rectangulish, easy to draw, hard to say, province. It's amazing. They were interested in that. Canada's second largest producer of oil, 17% of the world's uranium. These resources are, except for uranium in the north, these resources are in rural Saskatchewan. And so we have to continue to communicate this message. And one more thing. We have to continue to advocate that our federal government pursue free trade agreements, and then when they do and they successfully conclude those agreements, we ought to say thank you. The CETA deal, the deal with the European Union is good for Canadian agriculture. We asked for it, you and I. We asked for improved access for beef and for bison and for crops, and those barriers are going to come down, and they say it's a $3.5 billion boon to the Canadian agricultural sector. And of course, if it's good for Canadian agriculture, we're the big players in that pen. It's good for us. Yesterday, the Prime Minister announced that we will have a free trade deal with South Korea, the first one in Asia. We as a government in Saskatchewan have been saying to the Prime Minister, do more of these. That's where the puck's going to be, as Wayne Gretzky has said. That's where we should be. That's the part of the world that's fast growing, and they want food security and they want energy security, and that's what we do well in Canada, and that's what we do well in Saskatchewan. And so in this particular agreement, we're going to see the immediate removal of duties in so many of the crops that are grown by your ratepayers. A bit slower process in terms of beef and hogs, but the same that the Americans got, the same that the EU got when they signed a deal with South Korea before us. And by the way, if anyone doubts of the importance of these trade deals and the removal of duties, consider this. Prior to the United States and the European Union getting their trade deals, respective deals with South Korea, we, Saskatchewan, did about $240 million a year in exports to the country. Not a huge amount, but pretty significant. That's just our province now, not Canada. Since the more favorable trade conditions for the Americans and the European Union, that number's dropped to 50 million. We lost 80% of our exports to that market in wheat and 85% in canola just since 2011. That's the importance of trade, and so we need more of this, not just this one, but next in the ASEAN region and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and we also need the federal government to pursue a deal for TPP. They're not perfect, but I can tell you we will do well if barriers are down. Your ratepayers are good competitors. They produce the top quality products, crops in the world, and we've been successful on a fair playing field and will be successful in Asia as we have been already. Which brings me to really the final point that I wanted to make today. I hope you have seen, Dave touched on it, our government's commitment to and action on the issue of commodity transportation and the threat it poses to your ratepayers and to the province of Saskatchewan and to Canada. I want to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing on this for some time. We didn't just start on this particular issue. Last May, officials from the Ministry of Highways and Agriculture met for the first time with CP to say, here are our targets for the growth plan. Here's what we think the new norm will be in terms of crop production. We've just, by the way, broke our export record that we had set the year before, and that may well happen again this year if we can get our goods to market. And so we said to CP at that time, May, this is what's coming. Are you ready? In July, agriculture officials met with the government-appointed monitor of Canada's prairie grain and handling transportation system to say the same thing. In early October, Don McMorris met with CP Rail in Vancouver to talk grain transport. The Deputy Minister of Highways toured the Vancouver port in October, visited Alliance Grain Terminal. We were saying all the same things, by the way. There's something happening in agriculture in Western Canada. There is export growth from our province of Saskatchewan. We're breaking our own records. Are you ready? You know what was happening at the time, what the railway companies were doing at the time. They were laying off people. There were less cars, not more of them. There were less locomotives on the tracks, not more. We continued. In November, Lyle Stewart sent letters to the federal government and the railways, and the grain companies, and all the other stakeholders to let them know about the record crop and the importance of efficient transportation. Later that month, he met again with one of the companies in December when it was clear the grain wasn't moving as it should. Officials with the Ministry of Highways, Agriculture and Economy again met with the officials to again canvass what could be done and encourage them, exhort them to do what they needed to do. In the meantime, you will remember that in the months that followed all of this, Japan announced they weren't buying any Canadian wheat anymore. They were going to move to the United States. That is serious stuff, ladies and gentlemen. That goes right to the brand of this country as a reliable supplier of agriculture. We've seen that agricultural renaissance. We know how important it's been in the new Saskatchewan and the growth that we've seen. We can't risk it because the world is unconvinced of our reliability. Earlier in the winter, we appointed a delegation of Lyle and Bill Boyd and Don McMorris to go meet with all the stakeholders again to encourage service-level agreements. Federal legislation permits these service-level agreements with reciprocal penalties agreed to by the grain companies and the railway companies. But it's voluntary. So guess how many were signed? Not very many. None. And that's when we went to the federal government. I went to Ottawa not very long ago and said, everything has been tried. And intervention in any market should be the last resort. But there is no other resort now. There's no other option. We said to the federal government, you must act order in council, regulation, legislation, all of the above, you must act. And so last week when the federal ministers announced they were going to move on an OC first, not quite the cars we were asking for, but a great start, and then they were going to move to legislation, we said we were supportive of that, and I know that is reflected in agriculture across this province and across Western Canada. On this point, ladies and gentlemen, we should be prepared to do some good work in the next few days. You're going to have Minister Raitt and Minister Ritz address this meeting. I'm hoping that you might agree with the government of Saskatchewan about what specifically we want in that legislation. We are asking that there be a specific commitment in legislation to have railways ship a minimum of 13,000 cars a week, point number one. Point number two, we believe the legislation should include mandatory service level agreements between shippers and railways, and that there be reciprocal penalties, stiff penalties, if they fail to meet those commitments. A resolution from the floor here would help. Dialogue with Minister Raitt would help when she's here. Dialogue with Minister Ritz would help if he's here. You might want to add some other things in there. We'd support those, but at the core, that's what we need in this legislation. Moreover, there is a developing and very concerning situation happening now, just when we didn't need it, on the West Coast. Doesn't directly affect us the way this other issue has, but there's a trucker strike of both non-union and union truckers. I don't think it's under federal regulation, so you can't simply call for back to work legislation. We did that in the case of CN Rail, as you'll know, and the federal government responded. I'll raise this with Premier Clark when she's here and find out more about the British Columbia situation. I think there's a mediator going in to work on this. To the extent it backs up containers at all or just distracts what's going on at the port from what we need to do, it's not good for the country. It's not good for Saskatchewan. And so stay tuned for more on that, but it's something that we need to be watching very, very carefully. Maybe it is time, ladies and gentlemen, for us to think of something more long-term when it comes to our transportation network and the relationship between the labor and the management and all of the different companies. I remember being a young staffer on the Hill in Ottawa and working for a member of Parliament from Swift Current Maple Creek, Assiniboia, who introduced private members legislation to require that the transportation system be included in essential services legislation in this country. And I think we should at least have that conversation again, because that transportation system is the lifeblood of this economy. Everything that we prize, our quality of life, our chance to grow, our chance to succeed, rests on our ability to export, rests on our ability to be a reliable supplier of food and energy and all of the other things that Canada makes. People have said, well, you're a free market government. Why do you want the government intervening in the free market? Well, two is not that free. A duopoly is not much of a free market, and for most communities, it's one. And so though it should be a last resort, we should be looking at whatever mechanisms we can use to ensure that our brand remains strong, that your ratepayers are getting value, that there's cash flow so they can continue to build not just the economy of our province, but the economy of the Dominion of Canada. We need to explore every single option, and that includes federal legislation, and I think it includes a discussion about what might be essential service in Canada in 2014. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to conclude by telling you just a quick story. Early on, in the early days of our government, we were new. We're still relatively new. We always have a learning curve. But I was rummaging around in the office a little bit. I found a stamp, and I looked at the stamp, and the stamp said, "Super Priority." Capital S, capital P. Not priority, not important. Super priority. And I thought to myself, I hope our government never needs this stamp. I hope people will know that we will know what our super priority is. And lest there be any doubt this morning, our super priority will always be growth. Knowing that government doesn't cause the growth, but we can set the right climate for it and we can stay out of its way, our super priority needs to be growth. And again, I'll say it, you're probably tired of it, but I don't care. It's not growth for the sake of growth. It's growth because we know that's the long-term way we can provide for quality of life. It's growth so that our population grows, and never again are we buying luggage for post-secondary graduate presents. That's why we want to see this province continue to grow. That should be our super priority, and it should inform everything we do, knowing that we are going to improve quality of life with that. We'll be able to do more for the disabled, for vulnerable. We'll be able to reduce the surgical wait times and fix more highways and keep taxes competitive if we are growing. You know, the best part of Saskatchewan, by the way, growing and leading, is that even as we are aware of our own successes, our economic successes, maybe we'll read about ourselves in Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal. Maybe we'll see a transcript of a story that actually ran on Chinese television and has more viewers than the country of Canada has people, that ran about what's happening in Saskatchewan. The best part of the province about this new Saskatchewan, about our province, is that as good as all of that is, it's still not the best of Saskatchewan. The very best of Saskatchewan is Chris in the RM of Dufferin, and that we could continue to be successful, that we would continue to advocate for our economic interests, to aspire to leadership, but in a way that's true to our values and true to our principles and true to our history, that makes it not just a great place to invest or farm or mine, but a great place to live and raise a family. That's what you do every day as RM councillors. That's why you're here as delegates to this convention. That's why I say thank you for that dedication. And we look forward to a continued partnership with SARM. May God bless the Dominion of Canada. Thank you.